we may have a couple other people pop on as they have some freedom here this afternoon, but really appreciate everybody coming out on to our next performance school. Just kind of a summary of this for some people that may be new. This is just some different types of efforts to make sure we can break down walls across departments and share, and more than anything, just learn together. So we have typically had different people, different guests come on from Penn State across the performance department to talk about all things performance. It doesn't have to be the physical, it doesn't have to be the mental, it doesn't have to be really any specific area, but just blending everything, looking at performance from a wide angle lens. Here in a second, I'll turn it over to Tessa John. She's going to introduce our next speaker today. But just as a reminder that we do record this, so please just kind of keep everything that just understand that anything that you may say, we'll have the recording. If we go down a route that we don't want something shared, please email me or text me, and we'll make sure that we either buff that out or we don't share it at all. So that's the biggest thing with that. And then we are starting to extend this to some of our partners and teammates across the Penn State Commonwealth campuses. So new people that may be joining us, welcome. Thank you guys for being a part of this, and we'll get started today. But I'll pass it over to Tessa. Thank you guys so much. See you in a bit.
Good afternoon, everyone. Have the pleasure of introducing Craig. So Craig actually came to visit Penn State fall of 19. He came to one of our whiteouts. He's also an alumni of Penn State, went through this program. He is a native of New Jersey. He's a doctor of physical therapy and a sports and strength and conditioning specialist. Craig is awesome. His company is awesome, the PreHabGuys. He's going to talk to us today about blood flow restriction. But I think if you ever follow some of his social media channels, the PreHabGuys, you'll learn so much about just movement and body and how, exercises can help different ailments and whatnot. And they're really good, and they teach, and it explains a lot. So I'm going to pass it over to Craig. I'm so happy he's here with us today.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Tessa. Really kind of you. Let me make sure that I can figure this out. All right, so here we go. Just a forewarning. So my name is Craig. I'm going to be talking about blood flow restriction training to accelerate rehab for athletes managing soft tissue strains and tendinopathies. I usually teach this course, usually like an 8-9 hour day course. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can in 10-15 minutes. But then more importantly, I'm going to open up the floor to questions. So I like sharing this photo just because LeBron James, he shared this during the playoffs this past year. So he's using this as a means of recovery. And just a disclaimer. So like Tessa said, my company is the PreHabGuys, practice in Los Angeles. And I also teach BFR for Smart Tools. So those are some of the big things. So of course, this photo is nice. LeBron is using the Smart Tools. Like Tessa said, I visited Penn State in the fall of 2019. It was an amazing time. I always crack jokes because I, had an amazing time there, but that was the first time my wife ever went to Penn State. Flew in the Happy Valley within like an hour and a half. Next thing you know, we're getting this tour of this amazing facility. We meet the head coach, and then we're behind the stage at game day, and then we're at the whiteout, and I'm like, you have peaked with your Penn State experience. It will never be this good again. So that was amazing. I can't wait to come back. And I went out to LA for PT school, but Penn State always comes first. USC was just a means to an end. All right, so let's dive into it. What is blood flow restriction training? So it's restricting arterial and venous blood flow to a degree you can control by using a calibrated cuff placed proximally on a limb. In doing so, this reduces blood flow to the muscle in the arm or leg, which increases muscle oxygen demand. This increased demand forces muscles to work harder to generate a contraction, which is going to accelerate muscle fatigue. BFR can really augment a significant amount of peripheral fatigue, which essentially tricks the body into building muscle mass and strength in scenarios that we never thought were possible. It is essentially biohacking the normal physiological processes or processes of muscle strength and hypertrophy in the body. How's my audio? I just want to get a thumbs up from people, make sure that everything is good. Cool. So BFR is validated with a ton of scientific evidence. I've easily read 100, if not probably flirting with 200 articles, but that's a very small body of the literature. It's growing by the day. And today we're really only covering soft tissue strains and tendinopathies, but BFR can really help with bone healing and a few other things. That's been a game changer in my practice. I can talk about that later today. So these are the typical BFR protocols. You have IPC, you have cell swelling, you have aerobic, and then you have resistance training. That's basically the linear ladder of progression. And then I'll cover some examples of this throughout today, and then we'll come back to this slide. But I just want to show that. So how does BFR help with soft tissue strains? Well, let's just do a quick review of metabolic activity of muscle. So basically, metabolic activity of muscle, a way to break it down is we're looking at net protein balance. Net protein balance is going to be the difference between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. You can think of it as either the body is building muscle or we're breaking down muscle, and this is a constant process always going on. Ways to stimulate muscle protein synthesis are going to be stressing the muscle as well as fed gains, and then muscle protein breakdown is just going to be secondary to either fasting or inactivity, secondary to disuse. It's very metabolically taxing to maintain a lot of muscle in the body. So if you're not taking care of it, you're going to lose it. We're going to talk about how mTOR and myostatin genes are associated with these, and we'll dive into that in a bit. But before we get there, the big problem that we see with injuries with athletes is post-injury atrophy. And we can see this happen very, very fast. This can happen within 10 to 14 days, where we'll see a drop in muscle protein synthesis, as well as a decrease in strength. And we see this in not only type 1 muscle fibers, but also type 2. We'll see it distally to proximally. So if you're looking at knee injury, well, you're going to notice differences in the calf as well. So with that being said, we're dealing with anabolic resistance. We're going to lose cross-sectional area. What does 350 grams average out to? It's basically the size of the average human heart. We've all seen this in big injuries and surgeries. All right, so now I want to dive into a quick review of how injured muscles heal. This really sets the stage for what I want to discuss today. This is a really good article if you want to dive into the biology of how muscles get injured, but basically it goes through this process. And when a muscle gets injured, the body has two primary means of addressing this insult. It involves a delicate interplay between scar and repair. In the context of healthy athletes, lifting heavy weights for muscular adaptations, for instance, in the off season, the body is very capable of repairing that damage in a manner that results in growth, or more specifically, increasing strength and hypertrophy. We see this all the time: lift heavy weights, recover, rinse and repeat. However, in the context of a strained muscle, that insult is often too great to repair fully with muscle tissue. So our body, it's very smart. It's going to find a way to adapt and recover as fast as possible. It's going to activate the scar pathways to jump into action to help speed up the process. And I would highly recommend this article if you want to learn more about that. So this can be good as it restores a large amount of function rather quickly, but the resultant reduction in quality tissue affects the muscle's capacity to perform at a high level. And we see this in strains all the time. If you lose flexibility, if you lose strength, even if people get strong after, you look at MRIs, you're still going to see scar tissue, especially in hamstring strains. So the good news is it looks like from animal research that we can limit that scar via activity. The bad news is that moving that injured tissue hurts, which usually affects how much or how intensely we can move. I really like this slide here. This article came out recently where can we push hamstring strain rehab, pain 3 versus pain threshold? Is it speeding up time to recovery and time to play? Not necessarily, but we are seeing physiologic changes in the tissue that may be setting that person up for more success when it comes to variables that we can control in terms of what increases the chance of a hamstring strain. Credit to Johnny Owens from Owens Recovery Science for sharing this, but the fact that from this animal research that we can limit scar activity, this was demonstrated elegantly by scientists in the Department of Defense that found forcing a rat to run 1 week after inflicting a large soft tissue injury on their hind limb produced muscle regeneration versus the animals who were immobilized primarily produced fibrosis. So as clinicians, as coaches, as trainers, We can't always force our athletes with muscle strains to sprint a week after injury, and the sedentary state results in the muscle not receiving a strong enough signal to limit scar formation and prioritize muscle regeneration. So we can't just throw our guys on the hamster wheel. It can be pretty painful, but there's got to be some other means to help these guys out. So then let's talk about this. The TGF beta, the beta TGF scar tissue family, the superfamily, it's a scar pathway. It's likely the chief driver of the scar response following injury. Myostatin is part of that family. We're going to come back to this when we talked about metabolic activity in muscle. However, it has been shown in the BFR literature that we can use low load exercise with BFR to downregulate the myostatin gene, very similarly to how heavy lifting will. So therefore, we'd want to inhibit myostatin gene expression as a means of limiting scar formation and mimicking the forced running type of regenerative pathway seen in the rat models. This is one mechanism by which we believe we may help the body to prioritize muscle repair over scarring. In addition to inhibiting myostatin's expression, we would also want to maximize our protein synthetic response via activating mTOR, as this will optimize our ability to repair rather than scar muscle. So the more that we do BFR, we're actually going to activate mTOR, and that's going to inhibit and downregulate myostatin, which is a part of that scar tissue TGF beta family. These photos, why are they there? So these are myostatin deficient animals. So they literally can't break down muscle. You do this in rats, you do these in these cows, and they're just the most lean protein machines there are. So now let's talk also about satellite cells, because a key player in the repair process would be the proliferation and differentiation of satellite cells. It looks like the inherent hypoxia created by the damage to the muscle encourages this initially, and may certainly be further influenced by BFR exercise. Satellite cells also respond to lactate and cell swelling, leading to proliferation and fusion, and this creates an easier segue to increase muscle protein synthesis. When we use BFR, we get this huge dump of lactate, and also just occluding venous return is going to create this cell swelling effect, and that's just going to stress the muscle cells themselves, and that's going to help activate those satellite cells. We see this in this article here. We see a ton of type 1 satellite cell proliferation, but we also see it in type 2. And what's amazing is these are low loads just taking the failure. But you can't always take a strained muscle to failure, so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. What's also pretty amazing is that with BFR, probably my favorite part is that we get this giant analgesic effect with athletes that makes it way easier to rehab. We're getting angiogenesis as well as we're using this hypoxic environment during BFR, which the minute that you do that, you ramp up that fatigue, you get that muscle extremely tired, and you're going to get this analgesic effect. This has made rehabbing athletes so easy. Anyone that I've worked with in the past, if anything happens, they know to get in the same day. And now I'm going to dive into my own little personal experience when I strained my hamstring last spring. So this is a really good article if you want to learn more about that. Here's a graphic pulled from that article for what are some of the driving factors that help with this analgesic effect. Last but not least, I wanted to talk about growth hormone response compared to lactate. So we can see that we get this large lactate dump when we do BFR. In the minute that we release the cuff and that blood, it goes throughout the entire body, passes that blood-brain barrier, we get this large dump of growth hormone. Why does growth hormone matter? Well, it works with IGF-1, which is going to work with vitamin C to synthesize collagen. Collagen is going to be this ultra superstructure of everything in the body, and BFR is really good at helping to promote synthesizing collagen. So this stuff matters in terms of repairing the body. The verdict is still out in sort of what's happening with BFR. However, we know that it's more likely just promoting a really good healing environment. And we see this when we use exogenous growth hormone. Once upon a time, physicians and docs were doing this with tendon repairs. However, there are side effects when you use exogenous growth hormone. So the thought is, if we can promote more of endogenous growth hormone, the body producing its own growth hormone, well, maybe we're promoting more of a healing environment with less side effects. Let's talk about tendinopathies. So when I first started teaching BFR, and I probably should have mentioned that I've been using BFR for a little over 3 years now. I've been teaching BFR for 3 years. And when I first started teaching BFR, the question about tendinopathies would come up and I would be like, I don't know. We don't have any good research and literature to support that it helps. However, I use it because it's a great means to an end. But then this article came out, which really helped set the stage, and it put some of the poor articles that were produced prior to bed, because we showed, hey, we can actually get some solid results. So the big takeaways were, we saw that BFR can help with Achilles tendinopathies. This group, it's young males, and why we don't see any change in material properties is that in young men, tendon stiffness is largely explained by alterations in tendon size rather than the material properties. So this study did better than a previous study that looked at using BFR with patellar tendinopathy, because where they measured the tendon, they looked at distal as well as closer to the origin, proximal, versus a previous study with patellar tendon. They just did an average of the entire tendon size. And then in this study, every few weeks, they adjusted the RM to make sure that they were hitting 20 to 35%. And we see cross-sectional area improve as well as stiffness in the tendon itself. We also see strength and muscle size improve. So this was a breakthrough, and it supported what I saw anecdotally treating athletes. But I want to talk about that a little bit more. So here's the typical rehab process. If you exceed your capacity, an injury may or may not happen. But then we have this big drop in capacity. We also have a drop in tolerance, and it takes time. However, with BFR, we can sort of change this where you can start BFR immediately. And that's what I really want to dive into and open questions for, because that's what this stuff matters. And I want to make sure everyone's getting some value out of this. So again, here are some of those typical protocols. Now I want to go over some different case examples. So last spring, I strained my hamstring sprinting. It was pretty miserable, but within 15 minutes of doing it, I was doing BFR, and I was doing this IPC protocol. I did BFR for 8 days straight. I took 1 day off within that 8-day cycle. And I'm friends with the PT for the LA Rams, as well as I've done some presentations for Portland Trailblazers, some sports science members from Seattle Seahawks. And we chatted a little bit about how they're using BFR, and how they're using with hamstring strains is pretty amazing, because they're getting athletes back to running, back to sprinting within 11 to 14 day period. We're talking more grade 1 hamstring strains where there's no bruising, no giant injury or giant tears. But I was back to running within 9 days. It was pretty amazing. It hurt, it was challenging, but it was a matter of like, hey, as long as you can work through this and we can really help down-regulate this myostatin, we're going to be promoting more muscle regeneration. Probably my favorite way to use BFR is I see a lot of soccer athletes. So the most common stuff that I see is groin strains, hamstring strains, quad strains, and BFR with this stuff it is challenging. It is pretty damn harsh. And I've had soccer athletes come in the same day with a groin strain or a groin tweak. As long as there's no bruising, I feel comfortable getting the cuff on. I may adjust the pressure if the injury is right under the cuff, but then we're doing manual resistance and getting them to go to fatigue, making sure that they can deal with the tolerable pain, but it does pretty well. I wanted to talk about this because not only with muscle strains, we also see tendinopathies, right? So this was actually a college football player, had an ACL repair, tore it again his senior year. He ended up getting 4 knee surgeries. He had to get bone tunnels plugged. And then he at first had a patellar patellar bone-to-bone graft. And then he went with a quad graft. And you can just see the amount of atrophy. He was dealing with significant tendinopathy pain. So we just did a crazy amount of BFR. And what's amazing is I'm not even doing quad dominant movements in these videos, but you can see that his quad was just extremely fatigued. And he said that he hasn't been able to feel his quad like that since 8 months before we met, before his last surgery. And he was gassed here. He was absolutely gassed. In a matter of a few months, you can see his quad grew, starting able to feel his quad, but we hammered on him with BFR 2-3 times a week. And here's a great study here that just looks at, hey, you can improve quad strength deficits way after ACL. And to me, BFR is amazing with ACLs for quad strength and tendinopathies. So what's funny is this is one of my athletes in the past, used to play college basketball as well as college football. This was our means of recovery. And I know I shared this protocol a little bit with Tessa for like, hey, do this with your athletes the day after the game day, just help flush everything out, refresh those legs. And then next thing you know, Smart Tools is a company out of Cleveland, Ohio. The owner shared it with LeBron James trainer. And then I see that photo of LeBron doing that during the NBA finals, and take it for what you want, but I thought it was cool. So this is how I used to teach it. It was like, this is a means to an end. He had bilateral patellar tendinopathy. He had an old ACL repair on one side. He got back into a rec league and he's like, I can't do anything because both of my knees hurt so bad. So it would just be working this so that he can feel his quads. We're getting that analgesic effect on the tendons, and then we were able to load it up. Really, the biggest takeaway that I want to dive into is when you're starting out with BFR using with your athletes, the goal is minimal to no pain. It's really all about making it the most tolerable experience as you can, because it can be pretty gnarly. And then it really should be muscle pain versus aggravation of their symptoms. And then the minute that you stop exercising, it should chill out. And then within 24 hours, things need to calm down. Really, the goal is fatigue. It's not pain. Because if you can work the person to fatigue, you're going to have a better chance of getting that analgesic effect. If the injury is right under the cuff, which can be common in soft tissue strains, you just may have to adjust the pressure based on some of those slides that I showed earlier. In research, the typical volume is 30, 3 sets of 15, 30-second breaks between each one, but you can do time-based, you can do until fatigue or failure. You're going to get just that much bigger stimulus if you go until fatigue or failure, but it's not always appropriate. I just wanted to share these videos because this is honestly, when you work with athletes, when you guys have the resources that you have at a university, doing manual resistance is by far my favorite thing. So you can do it with cuffs, you can do it with hamstrings, you can do it with quads. The big thing that I talked about with the Trailblazers, it's like they're always dealing with how do we manage tendinopathies during the season? And it would just be like, well, just use manual resistance and, apply the resistance on the concentric portion. If they can't tolerate that, do resistance on the eccentric portion or do assistance. When you do handheld like this, you're driving the amount of resistance and you can really control if and when you're pushing fatigue. I know that was a lot to cover, probably went over my time, but more importantly, I just wanted to share that and then open the floor to questions, because I want to make sure everyone that tuned in is getting as much value as they can out of this.
Would anybody like to start us off?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start off. First of all, thanks, Craig, for taking the time and presenting about this stuff. My question is a little more general, but kind of using BFR as an example. Whenever you're starting to explore or implement something new into your processes and into your rehab programs like BFR, what is your process? I know you said you read 100 to 200 potentially articles on BFR. What does that process look like for you in vetting some of those things?
And I'm sorry, I missed the first part in terms of like making the decision to use BFR.
Yeah, correct. I mean, using BFR as an example, but also applying to anything you may be exploring or adding new into your process.
Yeah, so when it comes to using BFR, I really like to play devil's advocate, because if you go to a course or you get a new tool in the toolbox, you just want to use it with everyone. But really, I like to play devil's advocate, and it's like, does this person absolutely need BFR or do we not need BFR? And with athletes, the ceiling is so much shorter for them with the BFR compared to deconditioned older individuals. So with athletes, you really need to ask yourself, is BFR absolutely necessary to attain our goal based on the needs analysis, or can we dive into heavy weights? Because really you're only using BFR until you can load the athlete more specific to whatever their demand of their sport is. So you use it because they're in too much pain, they can't tolerate loading. Maybe you're trying heavy isometric loading, they're just not tolerating that, they're not tolerating body weights, or it's not appropriate based on a recent injury or a surgery. So it really just comes down to, if they can't tolerate anything else, can we do this? But more importantly, that's one way to look at using BFR. Another way is maybe an athlete is coming off of a recent injury, or maybe they're on a gradual return to loading program. And it's like, well, maybe we need to change how much they're loading and what their total volume is compared to some of their teammates. So then how can we supplement BFR to just decrease that total load on their body, but still, get some sort of stimulus so that they're going to benefit? Because with the athletes, you want to load them as much as possible. You want to do high intensity training. You want to get heavy external load. You want to add speed. It's a matter of using BFR to just segment them to that place as fast as possible. Does that help answer the question? Cool.
All right. I have a question for you as well. So you mentioned that there's a few different kind of ways you can use BFR. Like some people use it as a means of recovery, sometimes it's an injury rehabilitation thing. How do your protocols differ between like injury rehab and just a general recovery program, or like the tendinopathy maintenance type of stuff?
Yeah, so we can bounce it back to rehab and start there. The IPC protocol, as well as the cell swelling protocol, is going to be people that are freshly injured, or they just really can't do much. There's a whole pillars to it. It's like, okay, if they're non-weight bearing, or they can't tolerate cardio, or they can't tolerate isolated resistance training, start with that stuff. And you can do cell swelling with NMES, and you can really get a giant stimulus on a specific muscle. And then for recovery, I know NFL players that they're doing IPC protocols after games. It's almost like personalized Normatec. So you're just getting way more millimeters of mercury with pressure, because the Normatec, they'll go up to maybe 120 millimeters of mercury, depending. But the larger guys, if you want to get full occlusion and you're doing cycles of it, you're going to have to be doing 260, 280, even 300 millimeters of mercury on some guys that they have big legs. So, and then with the cardio, you can use it as a rehab purpose. You can also use it as a recovery purpose. And biking with both cuffs on, bilateral, just easy, getting the heart rate up. That's one of my favorite recovery processes. But then in rehab, it's like you just work from isometrics to single joint isotonics to, okay, getting more closed chain full body movements. And really you want to build the volume. Like with this stuff, it's hard to cover so much, because it's like I dedicate a whole course to this stuff and walking you through, and well, how much volume is too much or how much is not enough. So
No, that's perfect. I know you can't get completely into it, but yeah, that answers the question.
Perfect.
We have about 2 minutes before we typically kind of allow people to come break off, or we can continue after. But in the next minute or so, Craig, can you talk about the resources that you have online outside of BFR as well? And then, one way that we marketed this too this week was that a lot of people can follow you guys and get a lot more, even if you're not an athlete.
Yeah, so I can easily hang out for another 15 minutes. I want to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered, but everyone doesn't have to stick around. And then if you're looking for more BFR resources, we easily have 2 pretty big articles on our website. If you just search the PreHabGuys blood flow restriction training, you're going to find those articles and you can dive into that more. Like I said, I do teach courses for Smart Tools. In the fall when I came out last year, is more of just getting familiar faces there. But if there's serious interest from staff, by all means, in the future, we could always set up something on site, so that if you want to get your hands more dirty with it. I'm sure you guys have already gotten educated and gotten instructed by someone with BFR. And then just a little bit more about our company. You can follow us on social media. If you're looking for a resource to provide exercise programs and HEPs for your athletes or your patients, just check out our exercise library. That's a great resource for clinicians. And yeah, we're always posting blogs. Just follow us on social media, and then you can just keep up to date with us.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. And we are at the 12:30 mark. So if you got to hop off, thank you guys for being here. Next, or 2 weeks from now, we'll have Adriana from Performance Psychology on, which we're super stoked about. Anytime we can have Carl and Adriana talk, like it's always a dynamic opportunity for us all. So that's in 2 weeks. Encourage you to bring a friend, sell it, make sure we're bringing some different people in. And Craig, we'll stick on here a second if people want to, but really appreciate you and thank everybody for being here. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to get to do this and give back.
Does anybody have any additional questions for Craig or anything that we'd like to explore more?
Hey, Craig, I had one question, maybe a two-part question. Really enjoyed the talk, and I was wondering, you showed a video of like the assisted Nordic hamstring curls, and I was just curious, like if you've ever implemented that yourself and like how you kind of prescribe it, as far as, the standard 30 repetitions and then 3 sets of 15 is pretty exhausting compared even just with a normal assisted Nordic hamstring curl, or do you kind of go towards that, fatigue factor, fatigue until they can't do any more reps?
It's a great question. So with the athletes, if I'm feeling more comfortable with, I can sort of push the throttle and I'm not too worried about how much muscle damage they're going to be dealing with, like the tissue can tolerate that, then yeah, we're going to go until fatigue. We're just going to do 4 sets until fatigue. And that first set is try to max it out. And the next 3, probably doing as half amount of reps that you did the first set. And with the assisted Nordic hamstring curl, with assisted reverse Nordic hamstring curls with the cuff on, to me, what I've learned and what I've heard from other podcasts with practitioners that are using BFR, especially at the elite level with soccer players, BFR, again, it's a great segment to get players to tolerate full Nordic hamstrings coming off of a strain, because it's really hard to jump into that exercise no matter how much you progress. It's just a very challenging movement. So for me, I like doing assisted Nordic hamstring curls so that they can go through the full movement. And even if how much work they're doing at certain ranges is very low, at least they're getting exposure to that movement and they're getting exposure to those ranges. So extremely challenging without assistance. I wouldn't even recommend it with the cuffs on. I wouldn't want to watch someone doing that, but great question. And yeah, to me, that's where the assistant comes into play.
Yeah, to kind of like follow that up as well, I know each like case is different and like depending on the day, but when you're prescribing it, do you like to like mix in like, focus or isolated hamstring like movements like open kinetic chains with a closed kinetic chain exercise? Or have you like played around with like just one session all closed kinetic chain, or because I'm actually doing research on blood flow restriction here at Penn State, and
Nice.
We're kind of working on designing retooling my project to kind of answer that question.
Yeah, so if it's an athlete dealing with a hamstring strain and really all they can tolerate is BFR, then it's early on in their rehab. We're going to do as much BFR as we can, closed and open chain, isolated and integrated. Whereas as that athlete progresses and maybe they're doing more body weight, they're doing more loaded movements, adding speed, maybe at the end, we're still doing a few integrated as well as isolated BFR hamstring exercises. And then even end stage, it's like, well, if, I know that you guys use the Nord board, say that you guys are doing assessments and hey, there's still a deficit in that hamstring strength on that side. That's where we can do, heavy isolated hamstring strengthening, or if it's just not tolerated well, then adding in the BFR isolated. I do that a lot with the ACLs with quads. It's like, I'm going to thrash this person for 75 minutes, and then your legs are 8 out of 10 fatigued. Perfect. We're going to do open chain leg extensions, 4 sets until fatigue with the BFR. If they can't tolerate heavy loading, whether it be the tendon or you name it. So I use it all the time for accessory strengthening. But with athletes, it's trying to load them heavier if possible. It's a matter of plug and play BFR when they can't tolerate the heavy loading.
Everybody feel good? Mike, you just unmuted. You're good.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out when Craig can come this fall to do a course for BFR. We'd love to have you. So I'll exchange my email address, but we got to get you back to Penn State, brother, so you can come do a course and talk shop. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. The sooner the better. I'm a softie with the East Coast cold, but
Yeah.
Penn State is the one place that I will deal with the cold weather. So yeah, just grab my email from Josh. Happy to come back. It's always a pleasure, and I'd be honored to do it.
We get some fans in the stands again. Your wife can come back and try to experience a similar environmental scenario. I don't want her coming here when no one's here. That's a little different.
I'm telling her, she peaked. Like that was the last whiteout before everything happened. And
she came to
tells,
the whiteout when we were number 2 as well. So
yeah. Like she truly peaked. She has no idea. And one of her best friends is a Penn State grad, and she was like telling her friend, she's like, "Oh yeah, I met Coach," and her friend is just like, jaw dropped. You have no idea the experience that you just had.
Yeah. Good. Well, thanks for your talk today. This has been really informative.
Good, I'm glad. That's really the goal, and if anyone has any other follow-up questions or they prefer to sidebar in an email, happy to discuss. And yeah, more importantly, the course, you learn so much. BFR, again, it's a great tool to use. It has a very specific niche, but if that's the niche that you need to fill, it's amazing, especially with bone healing, with so many different things. There's more and more research coming out about it. Again, I love to play devil's advocate and challenge people why you shouldn't use BFR, but when it's appropriate, it's amazing. And I bring up the bone healing because I had a guy, he's a crazy athlete, broke his ankle dirt bike riding, and I got him in because he knew right away. We've used it with him before, and we just did BFR a couple times a week. And then he texted me yesterday, and he went trail riding 80 miles. He's only like 5.5 weeks out of the fracture. He's like, "This is the best my ankle's ever felt." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. That sounds like a little too much." Maybe I'm like texting a surgeon. I'm like, "You should call Tom and get him in for an image. Let's just double check it." But it's amazing what it can do for like bone healing and just being able to train when otherwise you wouldn't be able to train. Like that's where it shines, where it's like, what else could we or would we do? And you can get people that are recovering from fractures just dripping sweat, thrashed on the table because they just have no idea what hit them.
I'm sort of surprised they haven't done that in the literature yet, or maybe you've come across it, because they've done some bone healing literature for the E-stem or some of the bone stem products. So I'm sort of surprised we haven't seen that come out yet, because that can be an early, in particular for the early scar phase, right, or the early bone modeling phase versus long-term healing. But I'm surprised that hasn't kind of come out yet. Those models in the literature exist.
It should get published. That's what put BFR on the map with a lot of surgeons, because they presented it at their big conference every single year. They presented it in 2019, but there was a study where they looked at ACLs. Demographic was like mid-late 20s, all healthy males and females, and they were all patellar bone-to-bone grafts. And they did MRI 4, 8, 12 weeks out. And the group that didn't do BFR showed signs of osteopenia at 4 weeks post-op, 8 weeks post-op, and 12 weeks post-op, like healthy young individuals. Versus a group that did BFR, they were able to mitigate that and they showed healthier signs of bone. And it really struck a tone with surgeons, because any surgeon that has gone in and had to do a revision, knock on the bone, or they see the cartilage, it's soft, it's not the same quality. So they totally bought into it. And I think that's what helped get a ton of buy-in from surgeons and physicians with BFR. But it's funny because surgeons and physicians will be like, oh yeah, do BFR. But there's definitely things that you have to screen for, that you have to be aware for. And the only way that you're going to learn about those things is if you read into it, you get trained on it, because it's safe to use. It's hard to misuse, but you can definitely, it's no joke. It's a tourniquet, right? So you got to be trained with it.
Awesome. Well, Craig, on behalf of everybody, man, really appreciate the time. And I know Tessa's moving there with some athletes, but thank you as well, Tessa. And man, we'll have you out soon. I'll continue to invite you to these, and I'll send you the recordings. We typically keep it somewhat in-house, with the exception of people that come in and visit and guest speak. But you're a Penn Stater, man, and we'll continue we have here, and really appreciate you.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity. I always love giving back. It's amazing to just even be in this position. So thank you, and looking forward to coming back out there. And this time on Wednesdays fortunately works. I can move a meeting because I definitely want to tune into these more often.
Awesome, man. Sounds good.
There you go.
At the smart cuffs. Nice. All right,
Awesome.
man. We'll
Well,
really
take
appreciate
care.
it.
Likewise. See ya.
See you guys. Thanks, everybody.